We're all affected by these huge economic questions every single day, whether we realize it or not. They pop up in the news, they affect our wallets, and they're exactly what we're going to dive into right now. Yeah, questions just like these. Are prices for, well, everything going to keep going up? How secure is my job really? And what does it even mean when someone says the economy is healthy? These are the kinds of questions that force us to look at the big picture, and they are right at the heart of macroeconomics. So, to get a handle on that big picture, it really helps to know that economics has two main ways of looking at the world, two different lenses, if you will. Okay, so think of it this way. On one hand, you've got microeconomics. That's like using a microscope. It zooms way in on the individual trees. A single person's budget, one company's pricing strategy, a specific market. But then you have macroeconomics, which is our focus today. And that's like a telescope. It zooms out to see the entire forest, the whole economy, looking at massive things like national unemployment, inflation, and economic growth. And what's kind of wild is that for the longest time, the main way of thinking, which really started with Adam Smith, was that if you just understood the individual trees, the whole forest would basically take care of itself. The big idea was that if everyone just did what was best for them, the economy as a whole would just work perfectly. But then, something happened. A global crisis so huge, so absolutely devastating, that it completely shattered this old way of thinking. It proved that just looking at the individual trees was nowhere near enough. You see, that classical tradition had this core, really optimistic belief. A free market would pretty much guarantee a job for anyone who wanted one. All the factories would be humming along. But, well, history had other plans. And that event was, of course, the Great Depression. It kicked off with the market crash in 1929, and from there, the world's economies just fell off a cliff. The scary part? The old economic rulebook had zero answers. It just couldn't explain what was happening. I mean, the human cost was just unbelievable. In the United States alone, the unemployment rate shot up from a pretty normal 3% in 1929 to a staggering 25% just a few years later. Think about that. 1 out of every 4 people was out of a job. And the scale of this breakdown was just massive. The country's total output, that's literally everything the country made, built, and sold, dropped by about a third. The whole system just seemed to be grinding to a halt. So the world was basically flying blind. It desperately needed a new map, a new set of tools, a new way of seeing things. And one British economist, John Maynard Keynes, stepped up to provide it. Right in the middle of all this chaos, Keynes published his game-changing book. And let me tell you, this wasn't just some dusty old academic text. No, this was a full-blown revolution in economic thinking that launched an entirely new field of study. And here was his central revolutionary idea, macroeconomics. Keynes basically said, hey, stop obsessing over the individual puzzle pieces. We have to look at the whole puzzle box cover. We need to study how the entire economy works and, crucially, how all its different parts depend on each other. And just like that, macroeconomics was born. Okay, so we've got this new telescope, right? Macroeconomics. So what are we actually pointing it at? Let's break down the moving parts. First, a quick heads up. This framework we're talking about, it's typically used to analyze what we call a capitalist economy. Now, that's just a term to describe an economy with a few key features. Things are mostly privately owned, stuff is made to be sold in a market, and most people work for a wage. So inside this economy, macroeconomics focuses on 4 major players. You can think of them as the main characters in a story. You've got households, firms, the government, and the external sector, which is basically the rest of the world. And each of these players has a job to do. Households, that's you and me. We buy stuff, we go to work, we save money, we pay taxes. Firms are the businesses that hire us and make all the goods and services. The government sets the rules of the game, collects taxes, and spends on things like roads and schools. And finally, the external sector connects us to everyone else through exports and imports. The real magic of macroeconomics is understanding the constant dance between these 4. Okay, so that's the what and the how of macroeconomics. But let's bring this all back home. Why does any of this big picture stuff actually matter to us in our daily lives?
Well, it matters because macroeconomics gives us the actual tools to check the economy's pulse. It lets us track those big things like unemployment and inflation. It helps us get real answers to those questions we started with about whether our jobs are safe or if prices are going to go through the roof.
And that's really the whole point, isn't it? The goal here isn't just to make fancy charts. It's about using this knowledge to tackle the big stuff, to try and lower unemployment, to improve things like education and healthcare, and to ultimately manage the economy for the good of everyone, not just a few.
So now you've got the telescope. You can see the whole economic forest, not just a few trees. Which leaves us with one last question for you to chew on. Out of all these big goals, what do you think is the single most important one for a country's economy to focus on?